Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened global conflict if the White House was to put American troops on the ground in Ukraine. He said all of this during his first interview with Western media since the invasion began in 2022.
Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do?
Well, during the nearly 2.5-hour interview, he also spoke highly of his relationship with the former US President, Donald Trump.
Had such personal relationship with Trump as well. It is not about the personality of the leader, it is about the elite's mindset. If the idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society, nothing will change. It will only get worse.
All right, let's get some reaction from our colleague Nigel Farage, who joins us now. Good to see you, Nigel. What did you make of this?
Lengthy. A bit of a monologue, very long answers, not interrupted at all. I think the sort of history lesson going back over 1,000 years wasn't necessarily that helpful. What did we learn? We learned that physically and mentally Putin's perhaps in better condition than we thought he was. You know, all sorts of rumours about his health, did he have Parkinson's, all that sort of thing. So he still looks pretty fit and strong. His absolute determination that Ukraine should not be allowed to exist as an independent sovereign state was clear. I thought the messaging that if you send American troops to Ukraine, there'll be an all-out global conflict was his attempt to try and further manipulate debate in the United States, where, you know, right now, further funding for Ukraine is being held up in Congress. And I think what Putin sees is that in a long war, the West is getting tired of funding Ukraine. So, I mean, it was used by him clearly for strong propaganda purposes. I mean, well done, Tucker, for getting the interview. But I think what people will focus on is what wasn't asked. And I'll give you one big example. There are presidential elections coming up in Russia very soon. Opposition leaders like Mr. Navalny are currently in the gulag, and that question wasn't asked. So there'll be a lot of people saying he could have asked tougher questions, he could have asked more questions, and I think that is a fair analysis.
Do you think it's a good idea at all when we in the West consider that he has perpetrated war? He started this war over Ukraine. And of course, if you look back further to Crimea, we see him as the bad guy, the enemy. Do you think it's a good idea at all for a Western journalist to go over there and just sort of talk to him and try and find out who he is and why he thinks what he thinks?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, no, I think that is a very great value. I mean, I think all of our understanding of what is going on in Ukraine, horrendous though it is, all of our understanding of the Putin mindset, the Russian mindset, I think we understand it ever more clearly after what was said last night. They are not going to stop, and they're switching vast amounts of their industrial production in Russia towards defense. They will never give up on this. Now, we can find much of what's happening abhorrent, but the thing that shocked me all the way through has been the absolute reluctance of anyone to think, shouldn't we at least be having some form of negotiations? And I thought what was very interesting, and he has said it before, but he said it more forcefully, was that peace negotiations could have happened. You know, a deal could have been talked about. Now, clearly, you know, he would have wanted a deal on his terms, but a deal could have been talked about, but it was scuppered by Boris Johnson. And very interesting that the BBC weren't even debating that this morning.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all about context, though, isn't it? I'll tell you what is interesting, Nigel, and we played a clip of what he thinks about Donald Trump. It's very hard to take much from the translation, if you like. We were talking to Alexander Tolstoy earlier on, and she was saying, actually, if you listen to it in the original Russian, and what he's saying, his attitude seems to be, it doesn't matter who's in power anywhere else, actually. You know, I'm the person who's important here. There's a tremendous amount of arrogance, she says, in not only what he says, but how he's saying it. And so what he says about anybody else is almost irrelevant, in her view.
Yes, although, you know, when he invaded Ukraine, he would have made his own calculations as to what the West would do in response. Now, believe it or believe it not, you know, Donald Trump has told me personally over a year ago and has since told the world that he had told Putin very clearly that if he invaded Ukraine, that America would respond and threaten strikes on Moscow. And I remember a year before the invasion, Trump talking to me about his concerns over Ukraine. I actually genuinely don't believe, if Trump was in the White House, that Putin would have invaded. But I think what he saw was Western weakness, particularly after the fall of Kabul. So this nonsense in the media that because Trump wanted a good relationship with Putin, that somehow he's Putin's puppet. I think the very opposite is true. I think Putin actually respects Trump.
Actually, what you say, a lot of people watching and listening, Nigel, as you well know, will say, yeah, well, great, that's why Trump should be back in the White House. A lot of people will take the view saying, well, is this how we want the world to be run? That it's this mutually assured destruction is always that high on the agenda, that someone like President Trump would be so prepared to start sending bombs over to Moscow, because it's got the potential, obviously, of ending extremely badly.
Well, let's be honest about this. Mutually assured destruction began with the dropping of a bomb on Hiroshima. You know, it's been with us for 3/4 of a century. I remember, you know, being a young kid, the fear of nuclear war was very, very high and something that was talked about over family dinner tables. So that threat has been there for a long time. The question is, how best do you achieve peace in the world? And I think the lesson of modern history certainly is that you achieve peace through strength, not through weakness. And I repeat the point. I think so much of what has gone wrong in the world began with the American withdrawal from Kabul, with people like Putin thinking, look, the West have given up, they're weak, they haven't got the will to do anything.
What do you think will be Donald Trump's response to this interview, if he can bear to stand the whole 2.5 hours of it, which I sort of wonder. But I just wonder whether he will feel emboldened by it, because he does believe, as you do, that maybe if he'd been president, Ukraine, the war in Ukraine would not have happened. And can you explain why you think that's true?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, Churchill always said that jaw is better than war. So the fact that a relationship built up with at a level of mutual respect is a good thing, not a bad thing. I think that's very, very important. Trump, of course, won't watch it all. I mean, he famously doesn't want anything on more than one side of A4. You know, I mean, that's how he operates as a businessman. No, I think he will. I think he will very much say, look, you know what, the guy respects me, but the guy also feared me. He wouldn't have done this. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that the horrors that are going on, starting in Israel, now in Gaza, you know, all of that was a direct result of the Trump foreign policy achievement of the Abraham Accords, which were about to widen to include Saudi Arabia. And you can like Donald Trump, you can dislike Donald Trump. You can agree with building a wall or disagree with building a wall. But I think anybody with a rational mind would say that his presidency globally for an American administration was one of real peace.
I was just going to say, in terms of moving forward, we've had, it looks like we're going to have a Trump-Biden runoff this year, doesn't it? And there's been another gaffe from President Biden. Some people jumping on the bandwagon, of course, Nigel, saying, well, it just goes to show, you know, you need to kick him out. To me, it seems, frankly, the whole situation seems quite cruel now that this man is going through what he's going through on this global stage.
Well, it's cruel on us, too. I mean, the man's got senile dementia. I've been saying that for some months. Oh, don't be so beastly, Nigel. No, he's got senile dementia. He's not just the leader of America, he's the leader of the free world. And under his tenure, many of these awful things around the world have happened. Doesn't mean it's all his fault, but he is clearly totally incapable of the job. And I don't agree with you, Stephen. I don't think it will be a Trump-Biden runoff. I think they'll ditch him before the Democrat convention takes place in July. I think he's just too embarrassing. His personal approval ratings are falling and falling and falling. They're down in the mid-30s, and that in America is sort of historic lows. No, I think they'll get rid of him. And I think what was interesting about yesterday was a lot of the more liberal media have turned a blind eye to his mental deficiencies. Now they're all looking at it. And I mean, what do you think about it? To hold a press conference and say, hey, guys, my mind is fine, and then to confuse who the president of Mexico is with Egypt in this very same week you've talked about President Mitterrand being still in charge of France when he died in 1996. I mean, look, literally every single day now, there is something that happens that is literally cringe-making. So, no, I think they've got to get rid of him.
And you think they'll get rid of him for almost anyone? Or do you have, is there a front-runner name that you can predict now?
Well, clearly the sort of good-looking, charming Democrat is Gavin Newsom, who is the governor of California, very articulate, would play well on the media. His problem, of course, is that under his tenure, California has had some catastrophic problems. And it would be difficult for him to shake that off. There's nobody else obvious other than, the real outsider that keeps being talked about. Now, whether we take this seriously or not, I don't know. But Michelle Obama's name keeps being raised. Now, I just don't know. I would have thought that, after all those years in the White House and living under that pressure, and given that Barack is now like David Attenborough of America, doing wildlife programs and incredibly popular, why the hell would you want to give it all up? But that is the one that's constantly being rumoured.
She always said she wouldn't know, but you never know. Nigel, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed.
Why would you? Except, again, being put under so much pressure to run.